Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. This podcast is for you if you're a musician or audio engineer looking to create pro-level recordings and mixes from your home studio. My name is Mike Indovina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Indovina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, we're going to be doing a replay of episode number 45, which featured Zakk Cervini as my guest. We actually had a bit of a gap in our schedule, and I figured, why not play an episode that a lot of people really loved. This episode got a lot of great feedback, and it's one of the earlier ones too, and now we're over 200 episodes in, so there's a good chance that a lot of you haven't even heard some of those earlier episodes, so we figured this episode was a great one to bring back. And if you're not familiar with Zakk, Zakk is an awesome engineer who's worked with some massive bands. He's worked with bands like Blink-182, Good Charlotte, The Used, Architects, Goldfinger, and so many more. And when we recorded this episode, it was in 2020, and one of the really cool things that came from our conversation was the topic of Zakk transitioning from mixing records on big studio monitors to working on Apple Airpods and mixing massive records on that. And it's kind of cool to hear because it's very rare that you hear about people making massive records on just general consumer electronics or consumer products like Apple Airpods, for example, right? And so it was really cool to hear Zakk talk about making that transition and what his experience was like. And I believe to this day, he still does use those headphones to mix. So definitely cool to hear about. And I know that a lot of you listening to this are possibly mixing on headphones or earbuds yourselves. And if that is the case, then I think you're definitely going to find a lot of great stuff in this episode because you're going to learn all about his transition and all of the benefits that he found as a result of making that transition as well. So yeah, with that said, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So let's just jump right into it. Zakk Cervini, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. For people who might not be familiar with you or your background, can you give us a little bit of your story on how you got started, what you do, and ultimately how you got to where you are now?
Yep. Yeah. So the quick story is that, so I'm 27 years old right now. I've been producing bands since I was about 14 when I was in high school. Got a Mac laptop, started recording a bunch of local bands. I was never in a band, actually. I just kind of like skipped to producing bands, which it was just like what I loved. And then I wound up working for a producer named Machine and a producer named Will Putney. And then a couple years later, I wound up coming out to LA. I worked for a producer named John Feldman for a long time. And now I've been on my own for the past couple of years and just been producing, mixing, songwriting myself. I'm managed by a company called MDDN, which is founded by Benji and Joel Madden, who sing for the band Good Charlotte. So them and a guy named Joey Cimarron are my managers, and they take care of me and everything. And they have a beautiful studio, and so I have a studio at their facilities. And I work out of there, and I work out of my bedroom, and that's kind of what I do.
I love that. I love that with all of that stuff and the people you work with, like you're still doing a lot of work out of your bedroom.
Man, yeah. So honestly, the pandemic hit a few months ago, and I've been doing a lot more. Mixing has always been my favorite part of the production process. I write, I produce, I engineer, like that comes along with it. But mixing has just always fascinated me for some reason. I've just been obsessed with it forever. And so I've been doing a lot of it. And so when the pandemic hit, the studio actually closed down and we weren't really supposed to be there. And so I was like, I need to figure out a different way to do things. So at the studio, I have like, my setup is pretty minimal. It's just I'm a person who's very invested in technology. So I'm all about like UAD stuff and that. I just like to keep things simple with the minimal amount of variables because it makes the creative process easier. Like that's another discussion. But, I was like, I need to figure out a way to mix that's not on the studio on my barefoot monitors. So I bought a maxed out Mac laptop. I just like took the plunge and I set it up in my bedroom. And I kind of, over the last couple of months, I've developed a system where I mix on my laptop with my UAD, my UAD Apollo Twin X. And I mix on these Sennheiser HD 600 headphones and literally Apple earbuds. And those are my two main frames of reference for mixing. And then I'll check it in the car, I'll drive to the studio, I'll check it on the Barefoots. Like I'll check it on my AirPods a bunch of places, but I've been mixing 95 to 100% on headphones and 60 to 70% on Apple AirPods and Apple earbuds lately.
Wow.
So yeah, so my process has changed a lot the last couple of months, and honestly, I've never been happier with my mixes, and people have never been happier with my mixes. So it's kind of crazy.
That's so awesome to hear because, you know, you mentioned you have Barefoots, and some people think, well, Barefoots, like, you know, those are crazy expensive and whatever. And then you're kind of at the same time being like, yeah, these cheap headphones do a great job too. So
Yeah.
So what was that transition like? Like, how did you go from, you know, big full out awesome speakers to like these AirPods? Like, I know a lot of people tend to blame their monitors for why their mixes suck, and that's probably not the real reason why their mixes suck. But you know, it's funny to hear people say like, yeah, we just mix on cheap monitors and get awesome results.
Yeah.
So what was that transition like?
It was super scary because at the beginning, mixing on monitors is all I've ever done my entire life. You know what I mean? And so I was like, if this pandemic is going to be a thing, I just need to figure out a way to do it on something else. So I just wound up like it was a lot of reference mixing, like a lot of referencing things I've done and using plug-in chains that I know work and referencing other people's work on many different systems to kind of figure it out. So it's like everything, the different pairs of headphones that I use all have kind of a different purpose. And this has just taken a couple months for me to figure out, but it's like I'll dial in, you know, the low end in the initial mix on my Sennheisers, and then once the mix is kind of roughed out, I'll go on my Apple earbuds for like an hour or so, and just kind of flipping back and forth and making sure things don't sound harsh and making sure things hit hard and all that kind of stuff. And I've just found if it doesn't sound harsh on the Apple earbuds and the balance is good, then it generally will kind of translate. And so then I'll flip it to my AirPods and make sure that all the balances and everything, like nothing's like jumping out. And there's usually a couple things that will jump out at me. And so then I'll take it into the car, check the low end, see how that's doing. And then I might take it to the studio and listen to it on the Barefoots. And the Barefoots are extremely high detail speakers. So I'll usually hear like some room noise or some guitar noise that I wasn't hearing in my headphones, like some kind of details like that. But just referencing it on a bunch of different things, I personally enjoy doing that, and it honestly it makes the process like so much easier for me.
That's awesome. I love how you approach that with like referencing the low end on your Sennheisers and then checking everything else on the AirPods. Because it's kind of like being in a studio and having multiple sets of monitors there too, right? Like
exactly.
People will listen on the big far-field speakers and listen for the low end there, and then they'll listen to like the NS10s and focus on their mid-range there, right? So you're taking a very similar approach, but just doing it to headphones. So
yep,
that's very
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. I always remember too, like Chris Lord-Alge, huge fan of his growing up, like one of my heroes for sure. And I just always remember reading interviews with him, and he would say that he would kind of dial the mix in on his NS10s or his mains or whatever he was using, and then he would flip to like a boombox in the back of the room, because that's how a lot of consumers were listening to music. Like these interviews are probably from 10, 15 years ago. And so he would do the majority of the mix on the boombox and make sure that it sounded good there. And so just kind of fast forward a few years, the Apple earbuds are kind of like my boombox, because everyone listens to music on AirPods and they sound amazing. So I'm like, why not just make sure it sounds great on those from the get-go and then kind of tailor it to other systems?
That's awesome. So going back, you had mentioned that when you got your start, you were kind of you just jumped right into production. And so how did you learn production? Like, were you just self-taught at the beginning and then you somehow managed to get in with Machine and those guys? Or like, how did that all start for you?
So I started a little over 10 years ago, and it was before there were, a lot of places like yours to go to get advice and learn things about mixing and production and stuff. There were a couple forums online, but it was pretty much you kind of just had to figure it out for yourself. And so I am just obsessed with what I do, like to a fault, to my girlfriend's fault a lot of the times. I could never stop thinking about it. And so it's just like when I would record a band in my parents' basement when I was growing up, I would just get a couple microphones and I would just listen to albums that I loved, and I would just be like, why doesn't my stuff sound like that? And I would just listen to it for hours and hours and do whatever I could. I didn't know what a compressor did. I didn't know what an EQ did. I didn't know what anything did. I would just kind of mess around in GarageBand and Pro Tools until something sounded better to me or sounded like kind of close to the way I wanted it to sound. I guess it was just all trial and error and just all using my ears and also like I'm a guitar player as well, so just having kind of a musical ear and just being able to listen to people's performances and make sure the performance and tuning and timing and all that stuff is on point. That's really important as well. But yeah, it was just a bunch of trial and error and obsessing over things and staying up all night and a lot of that for years and years. And I'm still constantly every day learning and evolving, and I still am not even close to where I want to be today. So it's weird because even over 10 years down the line, I can look back and be like, oh wow, I've done this. Like if you told me when I was 15 that I would be doing what I'm doing today, I would have been like, you're crazy. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it doesn't feel any different to me now. Like when I go to approach a mix or approach a production or whatever, it still feels exactly the same as it did when I did it when I was in my parents' basement. I still feel exactly the same. It's kind of weird, but yeah.
Yeah, you're just still chasing like the best quality sound you can get, right? And making it sound like it's a modern standard. I love that. I love that you mentioned that you're constantly learning. And I think that that's a really important part for a lot of people is that like, you can't just think that you've done it all and there's no more learning and you're just going through the motions, right? You got to constantly push yourself. And it sounds like, you've worked with a lot of different producers and a lot of different artists and different styles. So that in itself is going to force you to learn different techniques and different approaches to things, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. It's, I mean, I work with a lot of different genres, a lot of different kinds of artists, and also the times are constantly always changing. So like, for instance, now everyone's real concerned about how is my music going to be loud on Spotify? How's it going to sound in a Spotify playlist? And Spotify has like their own algorithms for how they turn things down. And so mastering engineers have to compensate for that. And stuff doesn't have to be as loud anymore. So times are changing in that respect. But yes, I do also work with a large array of artists. I grew up listening to strictly like death metal, deathcore, like super heavy music. And also I loved Katy Perry, Dr. Luke, Max Martin style pop music when I was growing up. For some reason, I just loved like those two extremes. So yeah, it's funny. Like I've made a ton of metal records and a ton of heavy rock records, and on the flip side, I've also made a ton of pop records. So yeah, it's the process for everything is pretty much the same, and I just go through kind of a similar creative process. It just needs to sound like good and competitive and like awesome at the end of the day. Like that's pretty much is the end goal.
For sure. And I love that you are such a versatile producer and that you do work on like punk, metal, pop, like you've done a little bit of like hip hop inspired stuff as well. Like a lot of engineers struggle to make an identity for themselves in just one genre. So why do you think it is that you've been able to have so much success in so many different genres?
Well, growing up, first of all, I wouldn't really consider myself like super successful yet. But growing up, Rick Rubin was always I was always really big into him. And I always really dug how he could seamlessly jump from producing Slayer to producing LL Cool J to producing the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And that he didn't really have like a sound, like you couldn't pinpoint, oh, this record was made by Rick Rubin. All the records were just amazing, but he didn't have a signature like kick drum or guitar sound or something. And I always thought that was really cool because it helped the artist shine through as best as they could. Like the albums he produces, the art, it sounds like the best version of the band. So to a smaller degree, that is very much what I strive for. Like I strive to not have, I'm sure there is like some kind of sonic footprint to some of my stuff, but I strive to, when people hear my recordings or my mixes, I just want them to be like, wow, that sounds really amazing. That sounds really good. Like and I want them to think about the band. I don't want them to be thinking about me when they're listening to it. So I want to it's not about me. It's about the art and it's about the band. So I just want the band to sound the best that they can possibly sound. And I don't want them to sound like another band that I'm working with. I want everyone to have their own identity, So that's kind of where that comes from.
That makes a lot of sense. I know like LA is kind of known for being a place where sessions go fast. It's like you boot through things really quickly, and you push out songs really fast. So with that being said, like I don't know how reliant you are on using templates and using stuff to get you up and running fast, but I'm curious about that. And if you are using templates, how do you go about adapting these templates to such a wide range of artists? Because like you said, you're trying to make it sound like the artist and not kind of like your template, right? So how do you go about that approach?
Yep. So yes, I do have a template that I will start with that has. So every project I do, I learn, and this has been going on for years, I'll learn like, wow, that's a really dope synth-based sound, or wow, that's a really good vocal effect or something. And every project I learn, I just will always take away these certain kind of sounds or presets or whatever that I just have them on hand. It's like if someone comes in and they're like, oh, I want this clean guitar sound, I'll be like, oh, that's like something I did like a few years ago. Like, let me like pull that out. So pretty much every project I do, I have a big template and I'm just constantly evolving it and adding to it and changing to it. And so when I load it up, there's just kind of a bunch of starting points for a lot of things that already sound like great. Like I have live drums in there that sound awesome. I have a bass sound in there that's great. I have a bunch of guitar sounds, a bunch of vocal sounds, mix bus sounds, and just anything to get it sounding like a finished mix really quickly. But they're all starting points, so it's not like I ever load up the template and just record things in there and then just bounce it. Like that's not the point. The point is just to get things sounding really good really quickly, and then we can change them and experiment and find happy accidents along the way, kind of. But the template is basically just so that we're not starting from ground zero. It's just to get people inspired. It's just to get things happening quickly and get things moving really fast. And it works really well for me as well. Same thing with a mix. Like I'll use the same template if I'm like mixing a song. If I don't know where to start, I'll just be like, all right, let me start with these drum sounds and hopefully they work. And if they don't work, I'll tweak them. And then if they really don't work, I'll find something else. But it's just the point of the template is just to have really good starting points for a lot of different things.
That's awesome. So when you talk about like drum sounds being part of your template, are you talking about like program drums, or are you just talking about like your normal signal chains and you usually have a kit kind of set up and ready to go?
It depends. It depends on both. We do a lot of program drums lately, so I do have like a couple different program drum settings that I really like that I've evolved over the years. And then I can apply really similar settings to live drums to get them to sound really similar. I'm super picky with drum sounds as well, so I've kind of just developed all these things over the years. And when I find something, I kind of tend to use it just because I've tried. Man, I've been down the rabbit hole so many different times, and I've just found stuff that has worked for me. So that's kind of something that a lot of the times I don't want to change like too much because it can change everything for the worse. But it's like if I have like a kick and snare sound that I love, a lot of the times we'll augment that with, like, for instance, if I'm working with like an industrial group, we'll have like a banging live drum sound that I already have ready to go, but then maybe someone will bring in their analog sampler, and so then we'll layer that on top of it to give it a different character, but it still has the punch and drive of the drum sounds that I love, that I know work. So a lot of augmenting and giving sounds different characters and things like that happens for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I was curious about that because when I listen to your productions, there's a lot of stuff that has a live drum sound, and then there's a lot of like programmed sample electronic kind of sounds. How and when in the production process do you decide when you're going to go the live route versus the sampled route, and or blend them? Like, when do you make that decision?
It kind of just happens throughout the day. I'm the kind of producer that if we're writing a song and we're making a song, we kind of just get it all done in one day. We just get it all out really quickly. And it's funny you mentioned that because that's something that I always struggle with. And that's something that we always struggle with. Sometimes an artist may come in thinking that they want a programmed drum sound or a fake drum sound. And then throughout the day, we end up realizing that they actually do want a live drum sound, or like we just start blending. We're just like, the programmed drums aren't hitting right. And then we'll start to layer the live drums. And then we'll be like, it sounds better with strictly the live drums only. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm constantly fighting with, and that a lot of artists I do we're always just experimenting. So it also depends on the band as well. Like if I'm producing a band like All Time Low, I tend to think about the live show a lot. And when you see them live, they're a rock band with a drummer. So yeah, we're going to want to have live drums. But if I'm producing, I have this artist called Poppy that I work with who's super amazing. It's like weird metal fused with the Beach Boys. It's like a really bizarre project, but it's really cool. And kind of anything goes, and she's a solo artist. So she will have a drummer live a lot of the times, but we can use programmed drums and they will make sense because there's not a drummer in her band.
That makes sense for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that because like you listen to a lot of poppy or pop rock productions, and you'll find that some tracks will have that electronic sound and some have that live sound. So how do you find that balance and make them all sound consistent with each other, right? Like, So yeah, I was. It's interesting to hear you say that that's one of the things you struggle with because yeah, you can definitely.
Oh yeah.
It's like all production right now. It's all digital. You can throw everything at it because you've got infinite tracks and whatever, right? So it's sometimes taking that objective, 10,000 foot view and being like, okay, this does sound better this way, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, call me like old school or whatever, but like I'm a big fan of shows and I miss them so much. And I'm a big fan of just great bands that can sound amazing live with drums, bass, guitars, vocal. Like I'm a big fan of that. That's just personally what I like a lot. Like for instance, there's this band called The Interrupters who I'm working with right now. Super amazing punk band from LA.
I love those guys.
Yeah, they're awesome. And so they hit me up maybe a year ago and they were like, hey, we're doing this YouTube live session thing and we'd love for you to just throw a quick mix on it. And I was like, cool. So they actually covered the song Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. And it was just them live in the room, day off on tour. They covered it. I mixed it in like 2-3 hours, but they're such a great band, and they don't play to a click. It was literally just them playing in the room, and it was super easy to mix because they're so great. And now that song it's gotten a ton of syncs, and it's like shooting up the radio charts, and it's literally just that they didn't even record it for real. It's just them playing live in a studio, mic'd up, like one take, and I'm like, that's really cool to me, and that's stuff that I love. So yeah,
that's awesome. How involved do you get when you're producing a record? Like what do you see your role as a producer being? And I know that you are a songwriter. Do you get involved in the songwriting process, or is that something that sometimes you do, sometimes you don't?
Yeah, it kind of depends. It depends on the situation from band to band. Usually, I will wind up creating a large amount of material with the band from scratch. However, I do like it when bands come to me with songs that they have, or at least kind of ideas that they have and something to jump off of so that we're not just in the room, just starting from nothing. But yeah, with most projects, there's a lot of people that want to come in and have me start with a beat or a guitar or something and kind of build around that. And then there's a lot of people as well who bring in their own songs and have me produce them as well. But I would say I'm quite heavy-handed in terms of production and producing demos and like changing the sound of the demo and stuff. And that's kind of what people come to me for. Like it would be really easy just to have a band come to me with, fully thought out produced songs and just have me like record them, but that just doesn't really happen. Like that hasn't really happened to me too much. So like bands enjoy collaborating with me on creating the actual music itself. And I like doing that too. So yeah, it's pretty heavy handed in that for sure.
That's awesome, because I feel like that is something that has kind of become a little bit of a lost art when it comes to recording. Like, you think back to like the 70s and stuff like that, and people would book studio time for a month or whatever, and they would just write songs in the studio and had everything mic'd up and everything. But I find that less and less these days, because there is so much digital stuff people can do it from home. And I mean, my experience is that people come usually with songs ready to go. But it is really cool that you've kind of cemented yourself as this collaborative songwriter, and that is something that kind of separates you from a lot of people. So you attract bands that are into that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say that is fairly common in LA as well. It's like if you go to someone to do a co-write, it will wind up turning into the production a lot of the times. And I think there's something to be said for that as well, because I'm also a big fan of people get demoitis, and demoitis is a real thing, but there is magic in the demo. There is always magic in the demo. And so that way, when we're creating the song and recording the performances for the first time and everyone's all excited about it, I've over the years, I've just tried to develop a way to be able to capture the demos, but make them sound like a finished record. That's kind of my goal when I'm producing a band.
For sure. Well, and that makes sense. You're an engineer as opposed to just like the regular songwriter who might not have those engineering skills. So that gives you that advantage as well.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So you said that a lot of people will come to you kind of looking for some songs that maybe you've written to kind of spring off of. So how do you divide up your time so that you can like dedicate days to writing only versus, co-writing versus just engineering? Like how does that work for you? Where do you find that time?
Yeah, that is a really tricky thing. On any given day, I could work on 5 things. Like, for instance, this morning before we did this podcast, I was working on finishing up mixing like this Christmas EP or something I'm working on. And then, we're doing this podcast now. And then, I'm mixing some stuff for the Interrupters after this. And then I'm going to the studio with Joel from Good Charlotte. Like, we're doing like a session with like a new artist that he has. And then I'll probably come back and mix another project I'm working on from England. So it's like, I try to just honestly, I try to keep it moving. And I am super organized. Like, I do really try to plan out the day, a day ahead of time. Like, I try to plan out, okay, I need to get these things done the next day, and then just make sure that I hit them all. But people are constantly hitting me with fire drills and last minute stuff. So I just kind of have to always be prepared for whatever might be thrown at me. So to answer your question, I just work a lot and I just grind it out, but I love doing it. So I try to be as organized as I can, but sometimes it's just kind of is impossible. So I just try to be ready for anything to happen at all times, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's just what it's like out there, right? It's like, well, in a lot of studios, you just have to be very easily adaptable, quick to make movements, and just adapt to anything. So that's very cool to hear how much of a variety you like goes into your day.
Yeah. There's a lot going on for sure. That's another reason too that mixing is like my favorite part of the process right now, because when I am mixing, I found a way to do it kind of at home. So I can hang out with my girlfriend and like make food and like go on a walk and still like accomplish something like really like big during the day. And it's like, it's really fun. So that's why I like doing that, because I can kind of be on my own schedule a little bit more.
That's awesome. So from a songwriting perspective, since you are so involved with the songwriting aspect, what in your opinion makes a good song?
In my opinion, my favorite kind of songs personally, I like pop music. Like, I love 4 on the Floor with a simple melody with a great lyric. Like, simple songs are what I love. That's what I personally love. That's not what everybody loves. A lot of people like a lot of time signature changes and key changes and a lot of different stuff. But I'm old school in the fact that if you can play it on an acoustic guitar and everyone can sing along and it can sound amazing, then that's how you know you've gotten a great song. there's plenty of songs out there where the production does make the song so great and does make it what it is, and you can't really translate it to acoustic, and that's really cool. I love that stuff as well. But for me personally, I'm a big fan of just being able to sing the song on a guitar or on a piano and just have it still sound great. That's what I think is great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes, there's a lot of musicians who really pride themselves in their ability to play their instrument. And, I know you work with a lot of metal music as well. And especially in that scene, there's a lot of like guitar virtuosos that want to, show off how awesome they are and how quick they can be. And, even in like the pop punk world or whatever, you often run into people who like drummers who want to be like overly complicated for the sake of showing off that stuff. Like I find that happens in pop punk all the time. So how do you approach that when you're working with a band that maybe is trying to be a little bit more musicianship forward versus, the song, it's not serving the song?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, that's a really tough one. That's something that I struggle with every single day pretty much. But so I try to embrace that. So basically from what I just told you, from what I like from music, I kind of like stuff that's, okay, let me think of how to word this. So, if you have simple chords and a simple melody, it can easily come off as being something that's generic and throwaway. So I try to embrace like the extra musicianship or whatever it is that makes that band special and kind of pepper that in to make it something that is simple and good and catchy, but still has like a lot of flair and attitude towards it. So I try to kind of just embrace that and rein that in, but not go too insane with it where it's just not digestible, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. Well, yeah, I think that as a songwriter, you are always kind of approaching that song and how do you make that song show off in its best light, right? So yeah, that's awesome. So you said earlier that you've done a lot of work with John Feldmann. And
yes,
John is one of those people who I really admire his productions, and a lot of the records he's made have been some of my favorite records. So I'm curious just to get a little bit of insight as to like what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from working with him.
Man, I attribute like so much to him. Like I learned so much from him. One of the biggest things I've learned from him is just that you have to deliver, like how to deliver. It's like, okay, you can have a great band and you can have a great guitar player and you can have like cool stuff and whatever. But at the end of the day, like delivering a record full of great songs that all sound amazing, that are all like good, and being able to be like, here is that's it. It's done. Like we've put in the work and like, here is that product. And just being able to do that is the most important thing. Just basically being able to get to the finish line of things, and keep everyone happy and like stoked while doing it. That's the most important thing. Like I've learned from him, like I've never missed a deadline in my entire life. You know what I mean? I just show, like if I plan something with someone, I'm going to show up on time and we're going to do it and we're going to get it done and we're going to do the best job that we can. But yeah, that's something that I learned big time from him, is just, how to deliver things.
Makes sense. You want to be someone who's reliable and that people want to work with, right? Because if you have that reputation as being the person who always goes over deadlines, then like, people are going to not want to continue to work with you because they're going to miss their deadlines. And yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also learning how like your attitude is a huge part of being successful in this business, in my opinion. Like having a good attitude and just like being positive, like there's no reason not to, and that's only going to make people like want to be around you and like want to be happy and like want to work with you. Like if you just keep the vibe good and keep everyone happy, like why would you not want to do that? But that's just something that John like further proved to me, basically.
Of course. And I think that that's a major element. Like I totally agree with you on that if you're not someone who's fun to be around, like no one wants to be around you. So
exactly.
A lot of getting the magic out of performers is getting them in the right headspace, and a lot of that just comes from being a cool person to be around and being friendly, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
People are afraid to put out their emotions and record their their thoughts and feelings if they're really kind of uncomfortable in a situation, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's another thing that I've tried to kind of create in my own studio is I want my studio, there's no bad vibes, no judgment allowed, or like not like, because I want people to be able to get to their most vulnerable state and like tell me things that they might be embarrassed to say to their friends and stuff like that. I kind of want to cultivate an environment like that where like no one is ever going to feel judged. I might challenge you, but no one will ever feel judged or, out of place for saying what they truly think and what they truly believe. And that's a huge part of the environment that I try to create. Yeah, people need to be honest and open with me. Like, I don't want people to ever work with me and feel like I'm some big producer that they need to impress or something and like put on some kind of front and do with me. I just want people to come in and just be real and just make some stuff that they love. Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Awesome. One record of yours that you worked on, I know you did some engineering and you did some mixing on it as well, was the Blink California record. Like, I love that record, and Blink is one of my favorite bands, and has been for years. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to work on that record, and with a band of that size, like, was there a lot of pressure going into it? Because they had a new singer. There's a lot of expectations of a band of that size. Like, how did that whole project come about for you, and what was like working on that?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Feldman produced that project, and it pretty much came to him a day before we started it. He just came in the studio and he's like, "We're starting a new Blink-182 album tomorrow," and I was like, "Okay, cool." And yeah, I mean, there was a ton of there was a lot of pressure on that because they have a new singer and everything. But the first song that they wrote the first day that we started working with them was Bored to Death, which wound up being the first single, and which did really successful things, and which is still one of my favorite songs that I've worked on with them. And so basically we started off on that foot, and that kind of set the tone and just we already had that in the bag after one day. And so it kind of just made everything after that really easy because they had something that they felt like really confident in. And it was honestly working with Blink is they might be one of the easiest, if not the easiest bands that I've ever had to work with. And I think that's a testament to how big they are. I usually find that the bigger the band, the easier that they are to work with and the more professional that they are. And those guys are top tier, like as good as it gets, like amazing, super easy to work with, know what they want. And again, it's not like it's the easiest thing in the world. Like it's making a record is really hard, but yeah, working with those guys, like I would work with those guys any day. It's awesome. Yeah, they're great.
When you say that it's easy working with them, like in what respect? Is it just, more from like a collaboration aspect or,
Yeah.
So?
Okay. So, well, Mark is as good of a melody, lyric, top liner and bass player. He's so good at what he does. Like you can't really touch him. Like for him being Mark Hoppus of Blink-182, being able to write Blink songs, he's a professional at it. It's what he does, and he's just so good at it. And then Travis on the drums, obviously, is like he's just another level. He's pioneered an entire style of drumming and has changed the world of drumming forever. And so it's crazy. Like he'll do like a couple different takes of a song, and then he'll play like, a different beat in the verse, different beat in the chorus, have like a couple different options. And then sometimes he would just be like, "All right, Zakk, like, yeah, what do you think is cool? Just like use like whatever you think is good," which is kind of crazy. And they're all like amazing. So it's, yeah, working with, there's just never really a problem working with them. It's like Mark's always got super good ideas. And he can always deliver. And then Travis, same thing. And yeah, same thing with Skiba. He also like props to him. He was able to step up to the plate and fill some really big shoes. So yeah, they're all just super professional, amazing people at what they do.
That's awesome. It's really cool to hear you talk about that because, it sounds like they're one of those bands that just really improvises in the studio, and that's kind of ultimately how it comes together, as opposed to people who maybe have those song ideas, like we talked about earlier, and come in and this is the way it is. I play these parts, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, Mark always says to me, like, everything great that Blink has ever done has been a happy accident. So like, every cool riff or every like weird lyric, like there's always like there's like a story that goes behind Feeling This, where he was like waiting for Tom to come to the studio one day and he was playing a bass riff or a guitar riff or something, and then Travis, he was just kind of like sitting on the couch playing it or something, and then Travis came in and was like, oh, that's kind of cool, like let me put drums on that. And then that's kind of how a lot of their songs wind up getting made. But yeah, again, it's like, Blink, they're like the best pop punk band of all time, but there's so many twists and turns to what their band is, like dropping the hip hop beats over punk rock guitars and having nursery rhyme melodies and the personalities and everything that, on the surface, I guess it could appear to be a pop punk band, but it's really is much more than that. And yeah, they're great to work with.
Yeah. When you describe it that way, it's no wonder that you got to work with them, because like going back to how versatile you are and how many different genres you work with, like it seems like a band that's going to mix all of those different styles together is going to be a perfect fit for you, right?
Yeah, I mean those are the kind of bands that I always seek out. You know what I mean? But they also they went to Feldman, and I just like was his engineer at the time. But yeah, we've worked on a lot. I've remained friends with those guys, and we've worked on like many things since. Yeah, still talk to them on a daily basis. They're awesome.
One element of that record that I really love is that, to me, it sounded like some of their previous records that I loved. Like it kind of had like an Enema of the State, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket kind of feel in terms of some of the tones. Whereas like after those records, they kind of did a little bit more experimenting and kind of had different tones altogether. So it was kind of a cool throwback to me to get some of those tones. And I was curious if there was ever any discussion about that. Like, should we make it sound more like an older record, or was it just kind of whatever happened in the moment?
I think probably a combination of both. I think they just wanted to get in and just make the best modern Blink record that they could with a new singer. And I think that maybe going back and like referencing like some of their older catalog was a good way to kind of bring Matt into the group and have him be a part of it, to kind of like backtrack like a little bit, but have it still be modern and like sound cool and modern.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, when you're working with the band, like it's easy to get some of those older tones because they know how they got them, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's we spent like a long time getting guitar and bass tones. We used Kemper for a lot of it. For Mark's bass tone, we actually used like his live bass tone for a lot of it on his Kemper. But we tweaked that thing for guitars for like probably a couple days to get the guitar tones that we used for that. But yeah, I was really listening to like Take Off Your Pants and Jacket is one of my favorite sonically sounding records of all time. Like Jerry Finn, rest in peace, amazing. And I was really trying to get tones that were like an updated version of that record. Like that's what I was trying to do. So.
I think you totally nailed it then, man, because that's what I
appreciate that. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you talked about using the Kemper on the record, and I know that you have a couple sample packs out right now of your Kemper tones and that kind of stuff. So I was curious about your approach for recording guitars. Are you still using amps these days? Or are you going more Kemper based? Like, what's your feeling towards that?
Yeah. So I love amps. I love gear. I love it all. It's just the speed things are happening these days. Convenience is there's a guitar player that said to me the other day, he was like, we were discussing this and he's like, convenience is the death of rock and roll. And I was like, yeah, there's something to be said for that. But for me, it's like, convenience is amazing. And so a lot of records that I'll make these days, the band will actually, instead of renting a studio, they'll rent like a really nice Airbnb or like a really cool house, and I'll set up a studio in the family room and we'll record everything there. And so I use my Kemper for a lot of that, and just being able to have that experience and being able to do that and like not make a ton of noise and like have it like be fun is so much more worth it to me than using an amp. But plugins are like really catching up these days, and specifically STL Tone Hub. Shout out to the guys over at STL. We just released a pack of my own tones on that. But that is, again, with the quarantine and being at home and my Kemper's at the studio and not feeling like bringing that back and forth home with me, I've just wound up using that a lot of the time. And I know a lot of other bands that have as well. And just for, first of all, it does sound amazing. And second of all, like the ease of use is kind of just priceless. It's like if I'm flying somewhere to produce a record and I need to bring my laptop and my Apollo and then pack my clothes and stuff, like I don't feel like bringing, well, I mean, I'm definitely not bringing an amp and cab, and like also like a Kemper is like an easy thing to not bring as well if I could just use the software on my computer. And again, I can always like reamp it later if I really want to, but I'm not going to do that.
Do you find you're doing a lot of reamping these days?
If someone sends me a song to mix and I really don't like the guitar tone and there are DIs available, then I will. But I really try not to, because even if the tone is like really bad, sometimes it's just like the band's so used to that tone that it can sometimes change things a little bit too much, and that's not really something that I want to tap into. So no, I don't really do too much reamping.
That's cool. Yeah, sorry. I mean, sometimes that is the tone, right? Like that's what helps define a band's sound, right?
Yeah, 100%. A lot of the times I'll go into a mix thinking that I'm going to reamp the guitars, and then I'll get like a couple hours in and I'm like, yeah, this sounds cool. It sounds good. It's got a vibe. So yeah, I'll just like roll with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. You kind of talked a little bit about mixing, so maybe we should dive a little bit more into your mixing process. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. What's your typical mindset when you go into a mix? Like how and where do you usually start?
Okay, so first of all, I need a rough mix. Like that's pretty much as a must, because I need something to go off of and to improve upon. So I'll listen to that a bunch and try to get into the song and get into the vibe and see what's cool about it and see what I think I can improve. And then I do a lot of preparation that usually is on a separate day, and that may be anything from putting in drum samples if I need to put them in, to making sure things are organized and named and color coded, and making sure that the vocals are in tune and there's no bad edits, and going through all of the cleanup and stuff like that. And then when it comes time to do the actual mix, I just try to get the song sounding like a song, like as quick as possible. That's my first order of business. Like I'm not the kind of person that starts with, I'm going to mix the drums, I'm going to mix the bass, I'm going to mix everything together. I kind of pull everything up at once and mess with it and have my master bus instantiated with a bus compressor and a limiter, and just try to get it feeling like a rough mixed song as quick as possible. And a lot of the times I'll ask for people to send me their rough mix sessions if they use Pro Tools. And so a lot of the times I like to start where they left off at, because then like a lot of their balances and things that they like and that they're used to are kind of there for me to improve upon, rather than me having to just rebuild everything from nothing. So getting it to sound like a song is the first step. And then from then it'll just be hours and hours of details, essentially. I spend a lot of time making sure transitions are good, like making sure like the chorus really punches in from the verse, and making sure that all the different sections of the song flow between one another. And yeah, it really comes down to doing a lot of details. Like a lot of the times I really do take the rough mix to heart, because the band is really used to that, and I want to make sure that what I'm doing is definitely an improvement of that, but not losing the vibe that they captured in the rough mix, because no matter how good or bad certain rough mixes are, they always have a certain vibe to them that the band was excited enough about it to send it out to get mixed. So a lot of the times I find myself, I'll loop the verse of the rough mix, or I'll loop half the verse of the rough mix and listen to it like 10 times. And then I'll bounce back and forth that in mine and just make sure that every little word and every little drum hit and everything in mine is doing what it did in the rough, but just in like a better amplified version, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And usually in rough mixes, there will be some things that are way out of whack. Like there will be not nearly enough low end, or the vocals will be really quiet, which from doing pop music and kind of like the pop rock crossover stuff that I do, I like having vocals be really loud and a lot louder than most people. So I find myself like turning up the vocals more than they were in the rough mix a lot of the time as well.
That's really interesting, because I agree with you. I think that the rough mix is really important because it almost tells a story of like what they're expecting to get back. And, it also tells a little bit about some of, like, depending on who mixed it, you get a little bit of like their insecurities as well, right? Like if, like you said, vocals are really low. Usually it's like if a singer is mixing, they're like, I don't want to hear my vocal. I'm like self-conscious of it. So it is really interesting to get that sense of, where do they want things? What do they prioritize? And then, make your own better version of that.
Yeah. Exactly. 100%. And like, it's something that I take very seriously. And like I don't take it lightly. Like if someone is trusting me with their art to finish it off, I want to do the best job possible. Like I don't take that lightly. If someone is trusting me with that. But yeah, so the goal is to just make sure that it has an amazing vibe like the rough had, and that is just better. A lot of the times, though, the worse a rough mix is, like if a rough mix is like really bad, a lot of the times that makes my job easier, because then I can make it sound better more easily. Whereas if the rough mix is really good, I'll have a great starting point to jump off of. But sometimes I'm like, okay, what do I have to do to improve this and not make it worse? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like a challenge being thrown at you, right?
Yep, exactly. So that's probably some of the hardest mixing that I have to do, is when the rough mix is already pretty much there, and then I need to find ways to improve upon that. That can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do you know, or at what point do you know that your mix is done?
I usually, when I've worked on it, if I have a mix prepped and ready to go, and I do it all myself, by the way. I do all my own prep and stuff, and it's because there's multiple schools of thought on this, but the way I think about it is I personally enjoy doing all the prepping and cleaning everything out myself, because it helps me become more familiar with the material, and it helps me just kind of, when I mix a song, it's kind of weird, but I always think about it like I want to kind of live inside of the song. And so the more I hear it, the more I'm familiar with it, and the more I just know it better. And so I find that when I'm actually mixing, it can go pretty quickly. I can mix a song usually within 3 to 4 hours or so. And when I find that when I start being like, ooh, is the vocal like 0.5 dB too quiet here? Like, is the kick drum like 0.5 dB too bright? Like, that's when it's usually is time to stop, because I can wind up undoing a lot of what I've done as well. And it's also funny, a lot of the times I'll finish the mix, I'll bounce it out, listen to it on a bunch of different references, and then the last step is I always show it to my girlfriend, who she's a music fan as well, but she's not. She can sing, but she's not like a musician or anything. And she always gives me like the unbiased like opinion of like either like, yeah, this sounds amazing, or like the vocal, I can't understand what he's saying in the verse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then I'll usually like, that's like the last step. She will kind of give me some kind of note about something, and then I'll change that and then send it off, and it's usually is good to go.
That's awesome. Someone needs to make like the girlfriend plugin. that is like
I know. I was just talking about this with one of my friends. It's like we need to be able to switch between like girlfriend, mom, like all like all the different people. Like that would be so sick.
I love that idea. Just now that you've mentioned like the girlfriend, mom, and all that, it's like, man, that's such a great plugin to make.
I know. I got to figure out a way.
Well, dude, I really appreciate your time today, and I don't want to take up too much because I know you got a lot on your plate today. So thank you very much for doing this. Before we wrap up, I was just curious, if people want to learn more about you and follow you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Follow me on Instagram. That's where I post the most. It's just my name at Zakk Cervini. So give me a follow over there.
Awesome. And lastly, any cool projects that you're currently working on that you can talk about, that you're excited about?
Yes. When is this going to come out?
Probably come out in a few weeks.
Okay, cool. So by that time, I'm mixing some new Bring Me the Horizon stuff. So that will be out. That should be out by now.
Awesome.
And then I have Youngblood's new record that I just produced. That should be coming soon as well. And what else is coming soon? I'm working on a bunch of new records and a bunch of new projects. Oh yeah, my friend Dwayne, he's an up and coming artist. He goes by Dwayne. I'm mixing a bunch of his material right now. And so hopefully he drops some of that stuff soon. But I'm really excited about that stuff.
Amazing.
So,
amazing. I'm really looking forward to checking all those out.
Mm-hmm.
Cool,
awesome.
Man. Well, thank you one more time for being on here and taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
You got it, man.
All right. So that was my interview with Zakk Cervini, and that was a lot of fun. It was really cool getting some insight into one of my favorite records from more recent times with that Blink-182 California record. And it was really cool to just hear Zakk's approach to things and how adaptable he is. And I loved the whole part about him talking about mixing on headphones and how he approached that transition. And it was really cool to get some insight into his approach with drums and, when to use real drums versus program drums and, how to serve the song. So a really cool conversation. And Zakk, if you're listening to this, thank you one more time for being part of this. I had a great time. And thank you for listening to this podcast as well. And if you're currently working on new music and you're feeling stuck with it, if you're not quite hitting the mark of where you want to be with your songs, if you're not sure what you should be using to get your tracks sounding as good as your favorite records, or maybe you're just kind of in your head and you're second guessing everything and doubting whether it even sounds good enough to release, I would love to give you some feedback on your mixes and give you a very clear step-by-step process so that you can actually achieve the results that you're after. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can find all the details about my Amplitude coaching program. And in that program, I work one-on-one with my students to make sure that you're getting the results you want with your mixes. And in that program, we're literally listening to your tracks, making you personalized custom videos to show you exactly what you need to do within your tracks so that there's no confusion, there's no overwhelm. And in that program, we're literally working with you as you work on your mixes, listening to your tracks, giving you feedback, making you personalized custom videos to walk you through that process. We're eliminating all of the guesswork so that you're no longer stuck at home feeling lost and wondering what to do. Instead, we make this very clear so that you can get your songs done, get them sounding awesome, be proud of the results that you have, and ultimately release more music. So once again, if you're interested in learning more about this program, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. You can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much again for listening to this one, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit MasterYourMix.com.